I never imagined that the sentence that would break me would come from inside my own family. One quiet evening, sitting at their elegant dining table, I heard myself being dismissed like an inconvenience, like something outdated and unnecessary. Years of sacrifice, silent support, and unconditional love were erased in a single moment. I smiled, nodded, and walked away, but inside, something shattered forever. That night, I made a decision that would expose every lie, every hidden dependency, and every false image they had built. What followed was not revenge, it was truth, and truth changes everything. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Margaret Wilson, and I am 62 years old. I have lived most of my adult life learning how to survive quietly. I have learned how to smile without asking for recognition, how to give without expecting applause, and how to build something meaningful without leaving obvious traces behind. For more than 20 years, I have lived alone in a modest wooden house in Savannah, Georgia, ever since my husband passed away unexpectedly and left me to raise our son on my own. My home sits on a quiet coastal street, surrounded by oak trees and narrow sidewalks. The paint on the porch has started to fade, and the fence leans slightly to one side. In the front yard, I grow roses and small herbs, which I tend to every morning with careful hands. My car, an old Toyota, rests in the driveway like a loyal companion that has followed me through decades of life. Inside the house, nothing looks luxurious. The furniture is sturdy but outdated. The walls hold framed photographs of my late husband, my son as a child, and family holidays long forgotten by everyone except me. My days follow a simple rhythm. I wake up early, brew a cup of coffee, and sit by the window while the sun rises over the trees. I read newspapers, take walks by the shore, and volunteer twice a week at a local community center. On Sundays, I attend church and share quiet conversations with neighbors who have known me for years. To most people, I am just a retired teacher living a peaceful, unremarkable life. My son, Andrew, lives 200 miles away in Atlanta with his wife, Sophia, and their son, Liam. Andrew is 40 years old now, taller than I ever imagined he would be, with responsibilities that often seem to outweigh his confidence. He works as a sales manager, always chasing targets and promotions. Sophia runs a fashion blog that attracts thousands of followers. Their life is full of bright lights, expensive restaurants, and carefully edited photographs posted online. Whenever I visit them, I feel as if I am stepping into a different universe. Their house is large, modern, and filled with designer furniture. Their refrigerator is stocked with imported food. Their garage holds cars that cost more than my first home. Standing there, in my simple shoes and plain clothes, I often feel like a visitor from another era. What Andrew and Sophia do not know is that their life has been quietly supported by mine. For years, I have been a major shareholder in an East Coast real estate investment fund. I own multiple commercial properties, residential complexes, and long-term development projects. My financial advisors manage portfolios that most people would never imagine I could possess. My net worth is something I never speak about, not even to my closest friends. I chose to hide it. I did not want my son to grow up believing money solved everything. I wanted him to learn responsibility, perseverance, and humility. So when he struggled financially after marriage, I helped him in secret. I paid parts of his mortgage. I covered tuition for my grandson. I settled credit card balances. I transferred up funds under harmless labels that raised no suspicion. For 9 years, I built a safety net beneath his life without allowing him to see it. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if I had made a mistake. I loved my son more than anything, yet I often felt invisible in his world. Our calls became shorter. Our visits became rarer. His attention slowly shifted toward his wife's ambitions and social circles. I never complained. I convinced myself that distance was natural, that this was simply the price of raising an independent child. Still, a quiet loneliness settled in my heart. I began to realize that I was living two separate lives. One was visible, the modest widow in a small house. The other remained hidden, the woman who had built financial stability through decades of discipline and sacrifice. I never imagined that these two lives would eventually collide. But deep inside, I sensed that silence never lasts in the almost forever. And when it finally breaks, it changes everything. If you're still watching and starting to feel the quiet pain behind this story, please comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. What happens next will reveal the first crack in a life that looks perfect from the outside. Now, let's move on to chapter 2. After the quiet realization that had settled in my heart, I began to pay closer attention to things I had once ignored. For years, I had convinced myself that distance was natural, that every family eventually drifted in different directions. But somewhere between unanswered calls and forgotten birthdays, I started to understand that what I was experiencing was more than simple change. It was quiet exclusion. I often thought back to the first time I met Sophia in person, years ago in Atlanta. She had welcomed me into her apartment with a polite smile that never reached her eyes. Her gaze traveled slowly over my shoes, my handbag, and my simple dress before she finally looked at my face. At the time, I told myself I was being sensitive. I told myself that young people simply had different standards. Now, I recognize that moment as the beginning of everything. As Sophia's online presence grew, so did her carefully curated image of family life. She posted pictures from restaurants, vacations, and holiday gatherings almost every day. Andrew and Liam appeared constantly in those photos, always smiling under perfect lighting. I watched from my small living room in Savannah, scrolling through her posts on my phone. I noticed that I was rarely included. When I was, my face was partially hidden, cropped out, or blurred into the background. My name was never tagged. It felt as if I existed only on the edges of her digital world. Visiting their home became increasingly uncomfortable. When I arrived, Sophia was usually busy with her laptop or phone, editing videos or responding to followers. Andrew often excused himself to take work calls, leaving me alone in the living room. I made my own tea, cleaned up after myself, and tried not to disturb their routine. I started timing my visits, making them shorter and less frequent, afraid of being an inconvenience. The comments came quietly, wrapped in polite language. Sophia would glance around my house and say things like, "You should really consider modernizing this place someday," or, "I cannot imagine driving a car that old. It must be stressful." She spoke as if she were offering helpful advice. I smiled and nodded, pretending not to hear the judgment hidden beneath her words. Andrew changed too, though more subtly. Our long phone conversations turned into brief exchanges. His messages became shorter, often delayed by hours or days. He stopped sharing his worries and ambitions with me. Whenever I asked how he was doing, he answered with vague reassurances. "Everything is fine, Mom," became his favorite phrase. I learned to stop asking follow-up questions. The moment that broke something inside me happened one afternoon when I visited unexpectedly. I had forgotten some documents and decided to drop them off. As I stood near the hallway, I heard Sophia talking on the phone in the kitchen. She did not know I was there. Her voice was sharp, impatient. Then she said it, casually, without hesitation. She is just a burden. She would not survive without us. I stood frozen behind the wall, unable to move. My heart pounded in my chest, and my hands began to tremble. For a few seconds, I could not even breathe properly. Those words replayed in my mind again and again, each time cutting deeper than the last. I did not confront her. I quietly placed the documents on the table and left. On the drive back to Savannah, memories flooded my mind. Nights spent working multiple jobs, skipped meals so Andrew could eat well, endless sacrifices made without complaint. I wondered when love had turned into something so disposable. Outwardly, nothing changed. I continued sending money. I continued answering calls with kindness. I continued pretending everything was fine. Inside, however, I began to protect myself. I started organizing financial records. I reviewed old contracts. I saved bank statements. For the first time, I prepared for the possibility that one day I would have to stop being invisible. And that thought both frightened and strengthened me. If you're still watching and feeling how deep this betrayal runs, please comment number 2 below so I know you're still here with me. The next chapter will show how small lies begin turning into dangerous secrets. Let's continue. When Andrew invited me to attend their wedding anniversary celebration in Miami, I hesitated for several days before giving him an answer. Part of me hoped that this trip might bring us closer again, that time together in a relaxed setting could repair what had slowly fractured between us. Another part of me feared that I would once again feel like a stranger in my own family. In the end, I chose hope over fear and booked my flight. The celebration took place at a luxury hotel overlooking the ocean. When I arrived, I was immediately surrounded by crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and guests dressed in expensive suits and glittering gowns. Soft music filled the air, and servers moved silently between tables carrying silver trays. I stood near the entrance for a moment, adjusting my simple jacket, reminding myself that I belonged there as much as anyone else. Sophia greeted me briefly before returning to her circle of friends. She looked flawless, as always, dressed in a designer gown that shimmered under the lights. Andrew kissed my cheek and disappeared into conversation with business associates. I was guided to my seat near the far corner of the room, away from the main table. From there, I could see everyone, yet no one seemed to notice me. Throughout the evening, Sophia floated effortlessly from group to group, laughing loudly and telling stories about their travels and achievements. She rarely glanced in my direction. When she did, it was usually to ensure I was still sitting quietly where I had been placed. I felt less like a guest and more like an accessory that had been forgotten on a shelf. The turning point came during dessert. A group of guests gathered near our table, complimenting Sophia on her lifestyle and her online success. Someone asked how she managed everything so gracefully. She laughed lightly and said that she had learned to let go of unnecessary burdens. Then, with a careless smile, she added that aging relatives sometimes needed professional care because they could not keep up anymore. Her eyes briefly met mine. A few people chuckled politely. Others shifted uncomfortably. Andrew stared at his plate. In that moment, something inside me shattered. I remembered her words from weeks before, calling me a burden. I realized that this was not a misunderstanding. It was her truth. I waited for Andrew to speak. I waited for him to defend me, to correct her, to remind everyone that I was his mother. He said nothing. I stood up slowly, smoothed my dress, and picked up my handbag. No one stopped me. I walked out of the ballroom and into the humid night air, feeling both numb and strangely clear-minded. For the first time, I understood that silence had become my enemy. 3 days after returning to Savannah, a letter arrived from my bank. It informed me of an outstanding loan connected to my name, related to an online business venture. Confused, I reviewed the documents carefully. The signature was mine, yet it was not written by my hand. Someone had forged it. Further investigation revealed that Sophia had used my identity to secure funding for a personal fashion brand. The business had failed within months, leaving behind unpaid debts. She had hidden the situation from Andrew and hoped I would unknowingly absorb the consequences. I sat at my kitchen table for hours, staring at the paperwork. Anger rose within me, followed by deep disappointment. I had not only been disrespected, I had been exploited. Still, I did not call her. I did not confront Andrew. I did not seek immediate revenge. Instead, I made a quiet decision. I would no longer protect people who refused to protect me, and this time, I would not remain invisible. If you're still watching and realizing how much has been hidden for years, please comment number 3 below to let me know you're still following this journey. What comes next will change everything she thought she knew. Now, let's move on. After the night I sat alone at my kitchen table, surrounded by documents that proved I had been deceived, I did not cry. I did not shout. I did not call anyone in anger. Instead, I felt something settle inside me with quiet certainty. For years, I had protected my family from consequences. I had softened every fall and erased every mistake. That protection had not made them stronger. It had made them careless. So I decided to step back. My first actions were deliberate and calculated. Early the next morning, I contacted my financial advisor and instructed him to cancel all automatic transfers connected to Andrew's accounts. I stopped paying his mortgage supplements. I withdrew from the credit card plans that Sophia used for her business and personal expenses. I closed the secondary accounts that linked my name to their liabilities. Each signature I placed felt like closing a chapter I had kept open for far too long. A few days later, I met privately with my attorney in her downtown Savannah office. We reviewed every contract, guarantee, and document that connected my finances to my son's household. She confirmed that my withdrawal was legal, ethical, and long overdue. Together, we structured protective measures around my assets, ensuring that no future manipulation would be possible. Walking out of her office, I felt lighter than I had in years. Outwardly, nothing in my life changed. I still woke up early to water my plants. I still volunteered at the community center. I still attended church and smiled politely at neighbors. I still brewed coffee in my old kitchen and watched the morning light filter through thin curtains. No one around me suspected that I had just dismantled the financial foundation of my own family. In Atlanta, Andrew and Sophia continued as if nothing had happened. For the first week, they noticed nothing. Bills were paid from remaining balances. Credit limits had not yet been reached. Deposits still appeared in their accounts from previous arrangements. They assumed, as always, that resources would renew themselves. I imagined Sophia browsing luxury websites late at night, adding items to her cart without hesitation. I imagined Andrew approving expenses without checking balances. For years, money had flowed invisibly. They had never learned to measure it. Small cracks appeared quickly. A utility bill was paid late. A mortgage reminder arrived by email. A credit card statement reflected an unfamiliar warning message. Sophia began making frustrated calls to customer service departments. Andrew spent longer hours at work, attempting to compensate for financial instability he did not yet understand. One evening, my phone vibrated with a message from Andrew. He asked if I was feeling well and whether everything was all right. His words were polite, careful, and vague. I stared at the screen for several minutes before placing the phone face down on the table. I did not reply. Ignoring him was harder than I expected. At night, I replayed memories of him as a little boy running through this same living room, laughing freely, trusting me completely. I wondered if I was being cruel. I wondered if I was overreacting. Then I remembered the forged signature, the public humiliation, the silence that followed. And I stayed firm. Quietly, I monitored their situation through official channels. My advisor forwarded financial alerts. My attorney informed me of developing risks. I reviewed monthly reports and bank notices with the precision of a businesswoman, not a mother. Emotion had to be removed from calculation. Each update confirmed what I already knew. They were living on borrowed time. The safety net had vanished, and gravity was beginning to work. I prepared myself for what would come next. I knew desperation would arrive soon. I knew excuses would follow. I knew apologies would eventually appear. But I also knew that for the first time in their adult lives, Andrew and Sophia would have to face reality without my silent rescue. And that realization, both painful and necessary, marked the true beginning of our reckoning. If you're still watching and wondering how far this silent decision will go, please the comment number 4 below so I know you're staying with this story. The next chapter will show the real consequences beginning to unfold. Let's continue. The collapse did not happen all at once. It arrived in fragments, scattered across the days and weeks, like invisible fractures spreading beneath a polished surface. At first, Andrew and Sophia tried to convince themselves that the problems were temporary, technical errors that would resolve on their own. But reality does not respond to denial. The first sign was small. A credit card was declined at a restaurant. Sophia laughed it off and blamed the payment system. A week later, another card failed at a clothing boutique. Then a third. Customer service offered polite explanations about suspended limits and pending reviews. She grew impatient, convinced someone else was responsible for her inconvenience. Soon after, her business began to unravel. Suppliers stopped shipping merchandise without upfront payment. Advertising platforms suspended her campaigns due to unpaid balances. Several online partners canceled their collaborations. Emails from lawyers and collection agencies began filling her inbox. The fashion brand she had built with borrowed money and borrowed confidence collapsed under the weight of its own instability. Followers noticed her reduced activity. Engagement dropped. Sponsors disappeared. Andrew's professional life followed a similar pattern. He had been negotiating a major contract with a corporate client for months. The deal required multiple meetings, travel arrangements, and personal hosting. Without access to sufficient funds, he canceled flights and postponed dinners. His hesitation was interpreted as disinterest. The client moved on to a competitor. When Andrew informed his supervisor, disappointment quickly turned into formal warning. His reputation as a reliable manager was damaged. While their world was shrinking, mine was being quietly shaken in unexpected ways. Neighbors who once greeted me warmly began keeping their distance. Conversations ended abruptly when I approached. Invitations to small community gatherings stopped arriving. I sensed a shift long before I understood its cause. One afternoon, a friend forwarded me a link to an anonymous blog post circulating in local groups. It portrayed me as a manipulative, controlling mother who financially exploited her son. It accused me of interfering in his marriage and pretending to be poor for sympathy. The tone was cruel and calculated. The writing style felt disturbingly familiar. I read it 3 times. Then I began investigating. With help from a cybersecurity consultant connected to my investment firm, I traced the source of the posts. The account had been created using devices and networks associated with Sophia. Private drafts were linked to her email address. There was no doubt. She had been publicly destroying my reputation while privately benefiting from my support. The betrayal cut deeper than any insult she had ever spoken. For several nights, I slept poorly. My thoughts circled endlessly around memories and regrets. I wondered how someone I had supported so completely could view me with such hostility. I wondered how Andrew had failed to notice any of it. I wondered whether I had been blind on purpose. In Atlanta, tension consumed their home. Arguments replaced conversations. Bills were spread across kitchen counters. Sleep became fragmented. Fear crept into every decision. Andrew began waking up with the headaches and chest tightness. Sophia avoided mirrors and cameras. Their once polished image crumbled under pressure. Through it all, I remained silent. I did not defend myself publicly. I did not confront Sophia. I did not send Andrew explanations. Silence was no longer weakness. It was strategy. Each day, I compared their chaos with my calm routines. I still walked by the river. I still volunteered. I still drank tea on my porch at sunset. The contrast was striking. Their illusion was collapsing, and they had no idea who was standing quietly behind the curtain, watching it fall. I knew this was only the beginning. Something far more dramatic was approaching. The phone rang just after midnight, cutting through the quiet of my bedroom like a warning siren. I had been half asleep, drifting between memories and restless thoughts, when the sharp sound pulled me back into reality. The voice on the other end belonged to a nurse from an Atlanta hospital. She spoke calmly, professionally, explaining that my son had been admitted after experiencing severe chest pain and difficulty breathing. His condition was stable, she said, but he had asked for me. For a brief moment, everything else disappeared. The anger, the disappointment, the careful distance I had maintained for weeks, all of it dissolved instantly. I was no longer a strategist or a businesswoman. I was simply a mother again. Within minutes, I was dressed, grabbing my keys, driving through empty highways toward Atlanta, with trembling hands and a heart that refused to slow down. As I drove, memories flooded my mind. I remembered sitting beside Andrew's childhood bed when he had fevers, counting his breaths in the dark. I remembered holding his hand on his first day of school, promising that I would always be there. Those promises never expired. At the hospital, I found Sophia in the waiting area, her face pale and swollen from crying. She stood when she saw me, relief washing over her expression. Without thinking, I nodded and walked past her toward my son's room. Andrew lay connected to monitors, his eyes closed, his skin drained of color. When he heard my footsteps, he opened his eyes slowly. For the first time in years, I saw fear in them, unmasked and raw. His voice was weak when he spoke, barely above a whisper. He admitted that he had thought he was dying, that the pressure had finally crushed him. He confessed everything. He spoke about the lies he told himself, about pretending his income matched his lifestyle, about avoiding difficult conversations, about staying silent when Sophia hurt me. He admitted that he had relied on money he never fully understood, that he had grown dependent on comfort instead of responsibility. Each word sounded heavy, as if it had been locked inside him for years. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I held his hand and reminded him that love did not mean endless rescue. Protecting him from consequences had not been kindness. It had been avoidance. I told him that real change required discomfort, honesty, and accountability. He nodded weakly, tears slipping down his temples. Before leaving, I told him that I was organizing a formal dinner, not a family gathering, not a celebration, but a confrontation with truth. I explained that everything he believed about our lives would soon be challenged. He looked confused, but accepted my words without resistance. He was too exhausted to argue. Outside the room, Sophia approached me hesitantly. Her confidence had vanished. She admitted that she was terrified, that everything was collapsing, that she did not know how to fix the damage she had caused. For the first time, I saw her without armor. I told her only that she and Andrew were expected at the dinner and that their presence was non-negotiable. On the drive back to Savannah, exhaustion washed over me, yet beneath it, clarity grew stronger. Over the next few days, I finalized preparations. I reserved a private room at the Charleston Harbor Club. I coordinated with my attorney and financial advisors. We assembled records, contracts, transaction histories, and legal documents. Everything was organized with precision. At night, alone in my house, I questioned myself. Was I being too harsh? Was this necessary? Then I remembered the forged signature, the public humiliation, the anonymous attacks. I remembered years of invisibility, and I knew there was no turning back. The path forward was set. Soon, the truth would no longer be hidden. If you're still watching and feeling the emotional weight of this turning point, please comment number 6 below to let me know you're still here. What happens in Chapter 7 will expose the truth no one was ready for. Let's move forward. The private room at the Charleston Harbor Club was already prepared when I arrived that evening. Soft golden lights reflected off polished wood walls, and floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the dark water shimmering under distant city lights. Everything was arranged with deliberate precision. The long table, the neatly placed folders, the projection screen, the quiet professionalism of the staff. It did not resemble a family dinner. It resembled a courtroom. That was intentional. I sat at the head of the table and took a slow breath. My attorney and financial advisor were seated beside me, their documents organized, their expressions calm. Years of business meetings had trained me for moments like this, but nothing had prepared me for facing my own family under such circumstances. Andrew arrived first. He looked thinner than I remembered, his shoulders tense, his eyes shadowed by exhaustion. Sophia followed closely behind him, wearing a simple black dress, her usual confidence completely absent. She avoided my gaze. A few minutes later, her sister Vanessa entered, still maintaining an air of polished superiority, though uncertainty flickered across her face. They sat quietly, waiting. I began without raising my voice. I presented the facts. One by one, my attorney displayed financial records on the screen. Transfers, guarantees, mortgage supplements, credit card payments, business bailouts, 9 years of silent support, totaling more than $2 million. The numbers were impossible to ignore. Each slide stripped away another layer of illusion. Andrew's face drained of color. Sophia's hands began to tremble. When the forged loan documents appeared, the room grew unbearably silent. The evidence was undeniable. My name had been used without consent. Legal consequences were clearly outlined. Possible criminal charges, potential imprisonment, permanent damage to personal and professional records. I paused. Then I made my decision clear. I would not pursue prosecution. Not because I lacked evidence, and not because I feared conflict. I chose restraint because destruction was never my goal. Education was. Sophia collapsed into quiet sobs. Andrew stared at the table, unable to lift his head. Vanessa finally lost her composure, whispering apologies that felt too late to matter. I continued. I explained how close they had been to losing everything permanently. Their home was already under review. Their credit ratings were collapsing. Their professional reputations were damaged. No invisible hand remained to protect them. For the first time, they understood how fragile their lives truly were. Andrew stood slowly, his chair scraping softly against the floor. His voice shook as he admitted his failures. He acknowledged his silence, his dependence, his fear of confrontation. He confessed that he had chosen comfort over integrity. Sophia followed, her voice barely audible. She accepted responsibility for her actions, for her cruelty, for her manipulation, for her resentment. She admitted that she had mistaken wealth for worth and influence for character. I listened. Not as a judge, as a woman who had loved too quietly for too long. When they finished, I placed 3 new folders on the table. Inside were lease agreements for a modest apartment, therapy recommendations, financial training programs, and structured repayment plans. Not punishment, rehabilitation. My conditions were firm. They would live within their means. They would seek professional counseling. They would rebuild their lives without shortcuts. They would earn trust through consistency, not promises. No negotiations, no exceptions. They accepted immediately. As the meeting concluded, exhaustion settled over me, but so did relief. The truth had been spoken, the damage had been acknowledged. The future, uncertain as it was, had finally become honest. When we left the restaurant, the ocean breeze felt colder than before, but for the first time in years, I felt free. After the night at the Charleston Harbor Club, I returned to Savannah with a strange mixture of exhaustion and calm. For weeks, I'd carried the weight of confrontation on my shoulders, preparing myself for every possible reaction. Now that it was over, I felt lighter, yet strangely empty. The storm had passed, but the landscape it left behind was fragile and uncertain. I did not call Andrew the next day. I did not send Sophia messages filled with instructions. For the first time in years, I allowed them to walk their own path without my constant guidance. Loving them now meant learning how to step back. Slowly, real change began to appear. Andrew started attending therapy sessions twice a week. He spoke openly about his fear of failure, his need for validation, and his habit of avoiding conflict. He began to understand how deeply those patterns had shaped his decisions. Sophia, meanwhile, applied for administrative positions at small companies. After several rejections, she accepted a modest office job with regular hours and limited pay. It was not glamorous, but it was honest. They sold much of what they owned: designer handbags, unused electronics, expensive furniture, and decorative pieces that the once symbolized success were packed into boxes and shipped to resale companies. Watching those items disappear felt, for them, like losing pieces of their identity. Yet, with each sale, a small portion of their debt vanished as well. Within a month, they moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Atlanta. The building had no doorman, no gym, no rooftop lounge. The kitchen was narrow. The walls were thin. At first, Sophia struggled with the adjustment. She missed space, silence, and luxury. Andrew worried constantly about bills. They argued more than they ever had before, but gradually, they adapted. They learned to cook at home. They compared prices at grocery stores. They scheduled payments carefully. They celebrated small victories, such as clearing one credit card balance or saving enough for an emergency fund. Their life became smaller, but also more real. From Savannah, I watched quietly. My attorney forwarded occasional financial updates. My advisor confirmed that payments were being made consistently. Andrew sent brief messages, updating me on their progress without asking for help. I resisted the urge to interfere, even when I noticed mistakes. Growth required room for failure. Once a month, they came to my house for dinner, so no reservations, no cameras, no social media posts, just homemade food, simple conversations, and honest reflections. At first, the meetings were awkward. Sophia struggled to look me in the eye. Andrew spoke cautiously, afraid of disappointing me again. Over time, tension softened. Sophia changed the most. She listened more. She interrupted less. She stopped comparing herself to others. She admitted that she had used material success to hide insecurity. She thanked me for my patience, not with grand gestures, but with consistency. She helped clean after meals. She asked about my garden. She remembered small details. Andrew grew stronger as well. He learned to say no at work. He defended his priorities. He stopped sacrificing integrity for approval. Once, when someone dismissed me during a conversation, he corrected them calmly and firmly. That moment meant more to me than any apology. Still, fear lingered inside me. I worried that old habits might return, that comfort would weaken discipline, that gratitude would fade again. But I reminded myself that trust is rebuilt slowly through repeated actions, not promises. They were trying, and for the first time in many years, I allowed myself to believe that effort might be enough. Our family was not healed yet, but it was healing. If you're still watching and believing in this journey of healing and growth, please comment number 8 below so I know you're ready for the final chapter. The ending will change the way you see this entire story. Let's reach the conclusion together. 6 months passed quietly after the long season of rebuilding began. There were no dramatic turning points, no sudden miracles, and no perfect resolutions. Instead, life unfolded in small, steady steps, the kind that only become meaningful when viewed from a distance. From my front porch in Savannah, I watched those months reshape my family in ways I had once feared would never happen. Andrew kept his job. After losing the major contract, he had been placed under strict supervision, forced to rebuild his professional credibility from the ground up. He arrived early, stayed late, and stopped complaining about assignments that once felt beneath him. Promotions were no longer his priority. Stability and integrity were. Slowly, his supervisors began trusting him again. He learned that respect was earned through consistency, not image. Sophia changed just as profoundly. Her office job offered no applause, no followers, and no flattering filters. She answered emails, organized schedules, and handled routine paperwork. At first, she found the work monotonous. Over time, she discovered pride in reliability. Receiving her modest paycheck each month felt strangely satisfying. It represented effort, accountability, and independence. Their apartment became a reflection of their new life. The living room was small, furnished with second-hand pieces and simple decorations. Plants replaced luxury ornaments. Family photographs replaced framed magazine covers. The kitchen smelled of home-cooked meals instead of takeout containers. They learned how to stretch budgets, share responsibilities, and forgive mistakes made under pressure. When they visited me, the atmosphere had transformed. Our monthly dinners were no longer stiff or cautious. We talked openly about challenges, successes, and disappointments. Andrew discussed workplace struggles. Sophia shared lessons from her job. They asked about my projects and listened attentively. Laughter returned, unforced and genuine. Meanwhile, I began investing more openly in myself. I launched a small scholarship program for middle-aged women seeking to restart their careers. I partnered with community organizations to support entrepreneurial training. I finally renovated parts of my house, replacing worn floors and outdated cabinets, not to impress anyone, but to honor the life I had built. One evening, while sitting in my newly painted kitchen, I realized how much had changed. Andrew no longer looked at me as a financial resource. He looked at me as a mentor and a mother. Sophia no longer measured worth through luxury. She measured it through effort and character. Their gratitude was not dramatic. It was consistent. On one visit, without ceremony, they both apologized again. Not with tears or explanations, but with clarity. They acknowledged the harm they had caused and the responsibility they now carried. There were no excuses, no defensiveness, only acceptance. That mattered more than any repayment plan. I began to understand that true wealth had little to do with numbers. It lived in peaceful evenings, in honest conversations, in the freedom to live without pretending, in relationships built on respect instead of dependence. We had lost a lifestyle, but we had gained something far more valuable: trust. As I watched Andrew and Sophia leave that night, driving away in their modest used car, I felt a quiet pride settle in my chest. They were no longer protected by illusions. They were protected by resilience, and that I knew would last. On quiet afternoons, when the sunlight filters softly through the curtains of my renovated home, I often find myself sitting near the window with a cup of tea, watching the shadows move slowly across the floor. Savannah remains the same in many ways, with its calm streets and familiar faces, yet everything feels different now. The storms that once shook my life have passed, leaving behind clarity instead of chaos. Looking back, I see how much of my life was shaped by silence. For decades, I believed that love meant endurance. It meant sacrificing comfort, swallowing disappointment, and pretending not to notice when my feelings were dismissed. I convinced myself that patience was strength, and that speaking up would only create conflict. In doing so, I slowly erased my own presence from my family's world. I see now that my silence was never neutral. Each time I chose not to defend myself, I taught others that my boundaries were flexible. Each time I forgave without reflection, I reinforced habits that harmed both them and me. My intention had always been protection, but protection without limits becomes permission. I also recognize my own mistakes. By shielding Andrew from financial reality, I deprived him of important lessons. By hiding my struggles and achievements, I created a false narrative that confused him. I thought I was helping him grow. Instead, I postponed his maturity. Love, when guided by fear, often leads us in the wrong direction. Learning to set boundaries was not easy. For a long time, I associated firmness with cruelty. I believed that saying no meant failing as a mother. Only after everything collapsed did I understand that boundaries are acts of respect, not rejection. They protect relationships from resentment and dependence. Today, my role in my family is different. I am no longer the silent provider or the invisible rescuer. I am a listener, an advisor, and a witness to their growth. I celebrate their efforts without controlling their choices. I offer guidance without taking responsibility for outcomes that are not mine to carry. In my garden, where roses bloom beside freshly planted herbs, I often reflect on how life mirrors nature. Growth requires pruning. Strength requires exposure. Renewal requires patience. Every plant that thrives here has endured seasons of hardship before finding balance. The same is true for me. I do not regret the years I spent helping my family. I do not regret the sacrifices, or the late nights, or the quiet tears. Those experiences shaped my resilience. They taught me compassion and perseverance. But I am grateful that I finally learned when to stop giving in ways that diminished me. If there is one truth I would share with anyone walking a similar path, it is this: your worth does not depend on how much you provide. It depends on how you honor yourself. Respect must be protected. Love must be balanced. And silence, when broken with courage, can rebuild what once seemed lost. Today, I live without illusions. I live with honesty, dignity, and peace. And that to me is the greatest wealth of all. Life often teaches its deepest lessons through loss, silence, and uncomfortable truth. When comfort replaces honesty, relationships slowly weaken. When love lacks boundaries, it turns into quiet sacrifice. True growth begins the moment we choose self-respect over fear, clarity over denial, and courage over habit. Real success is not measured by wealth, status, or appearances, but by integrity, emotional maturity, and the ability to rebuild with humility. Every ending carries the seed of renewal. Every hardship offers the chance to become wiser, stronger, and more compassionate. In learning when to give and when to stop, we learn how to live fully, without regret or illusion. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and follow for more meaningful stories. Your support helps this community grow.